I opened the envelope from the Westfield Commons Homeowners Association and stared at the number in disbelief, reading it 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. $350 per month for pool and fitness center amenities, retroactive for 3 years, plus late fees totaling over $15,000. My hands shook as I held the paper, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank. The problem was simple and infuriating. I didn't have access to any pool. There was no gym I could use. My townhouse in Phoenix, Arizona sat on the outer edge of the development, almost a quarter-mile from the community center where these amenities supposedly existed. When I'd bought the place 3 years ago, the sales agent never mentioned anything about a pool or fitness center. I'd reviewed every document, every disclosure, every fee schedule. The monthly HOA dues were $120, covering landscaping, common area maintenance, and trash removal. I called the HOA office immediately, my voice tight with controlled anger as I asked to speak with whoever sent this letter. The receptionist put me on hold for nearly 10 minutes before a woman picked up, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is Patricia Drummond, HOA president. How may I help you?" Of course, her name was Patricia. She sounded exactly like every nightmare HOA president I'd ever heard about, with that particular tone that suggested she'd already decided I was wrong before I even spoke. "I'm Quinton Briggs from Unit 847. I just received a bill for pool and gym access going back 3 years. There must be some mistake, because I've never had access to these facilities." "Mr. Briggs, there's no mistake. All residents in Westfield Commons are assessed for amenity maintenance. It's in your CC and RAs. "I've read my CC and RAs cover to cover," I said, keeping my voice level. "There's nothing in there about a pool or fitness center, and even if there were, I literally cannot access these facilities. Where are they?" "They're in the community center on Saguaro Boulevard. All homeowners have access during operating hours." I pulled up Google Maps on my computer while keeping the phone pressed to my ear. "The community center is on the opposite side of the development from my unit. I've driven past it dozens of times. There's a gate with a keypad." "Yes, all residents receive an access code when they close on their property." "I never received any code. I've never even been told these amenities exist." Patricia sighed dramatically, as if I were a particularly slow child. "Mr. Briggs, ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from paying your share. The pool was renovated last year at significant expense, and the fitness center was upgraded with new equipment. These improvements benefit all homeowners by increasing property values. How do they benefit me if I can't use them?" "You can use them. You simply need to come to the office and get your access code." "Fine, I'll come by tomorrow. But I'm not paying 3 years of back fees for facilities I didn't know existed and couldn't access. The assessment stands, Mr. Briggs. Payment is due within 30 days or we'll place a lien on your property." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my home office, staring at the bill and feeling my blood pressure rising. $15,000. That was 2 months of my salary as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company. I'd just finished paying off my student loans last year. This would wipe out most of my emergency fund. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, a small building tucked behind the community center. Patricia sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged to a corporate executive rather than someone managing a suburban housing development. She was probably in her early 50s, with blonde hair cut in a severe bob and glasses that she peered over when I walked in. "Mr. Briggs, I wondered if you'd show up. I'm here to get this access code you mentioned and to dispute this assessment." She slid a piece of paper across her desk with a 4-digit code written on it. "There's your access. As for the assessment, there's nothing to dispute. The board voted on it last month. It was a unanimous decision." "Was there a meeting? Was I notified?" "The meeting was posted on the community bulletin board 30 days in advance, as required by Arizona law." "I've never seen any bulletin board." "It's right outside this office. Perhaps if you'd been more engaged with your community, you'd be aware of these things." I felt my jaw clench. I work 50 hours a week. I keep my property maintained, I pay my dues on time, and I don't bother anyone. That's what being a good neighbor looks like. Being a good neighbor also means paying your fair share for community improvements. Improvements I never voted on or agreed to. Patricia leaned back in her chair, a thin smile on her lips. Mr. Briggs, when you purchased your home, you agreed to abide by the HOA's rules and regulations. That includes special assessments approved by the board. If you don't like it, you're welcome to sell your property and move somewhere without an HOA. I wanted to say something cutting, something that would wipe that smug expression off her face, but I knew it wouldn't help. Instead, I took the paper with the access code and left, driving straight to the community center. The gate looked newer than I remembered, with a fancy electronic keypad and a camera pointed at anyone who approached. I punched in the code. Nothing happened. I tried again, making sure I entered each digit correctly. The red light on the keypad blinked mockingly at me. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office again. Patricia Drummond speaking. The code doesn't work. I'm standing at the gate right now. Did you enter it correctly? Yes, I entered it correctly. 4 digits, exactly as written. Hold on, I heard keyboard clicking. Oh, I see the problem. Your code hasn't been activated yet. It takes 3 to 5 business days to process. You couldn't have mentioned that 10 minutes ago when I was in your office. It slipped my mind. Is there anything else? Yes, I want copies of all the meeting minutes where this assessment was discussed and voted on. I want to see the contractor bids for the pool renovation and gym equipment, and I want documentation showing that I was properly notified of these charges before they were implemented. Those are available for review by appointment only. I can schedule you for 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks? I have 30 days to pay or you're threatening to lien my property. But I need to wait 2 weeks just to see the documents? I'm very busy, Mr. Briggs. The HOA doesn't revolve around your schedule. This is ridiculous. I'm entitled to review HOA documents as a homeowner. And you will be able to review them in 2 weeks. Goodbye, Mr. Briggs. She hung up again. I stood there in the parking lot, feeling the Arizona sun beating down on me, and realized this woman wasn't going to help me. She'd made up her mind that I was going to pay, and she'd make the process as difficult as possible. That evening, I started doing research. Arizona has specific laws governing homeowners associations, and I spent hours reading through statutes and court cases. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. Homeowners had rights, but enforcing those rights often meant going to court, which meant lawyers and money and time. I also drove around the development that weekend, looking at the bulletin board Patricia had mentioned. It was a small corkboard behind a locked glass case, mounted on the wall outside the HOA office in a corner where nobody would see it unless they specifically came to the office. There were faded notices about pool hours and reminders to keep trash cans out of sight. I couldn't find anything about the special assessment meeting. On Monday, I called a real estate attorney whose number I found online. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and her receptionist said she could meet with me that afternoon for a consultation. Jennifer's office was in a strip mall in Tempe, sandwiched between a nail salon and an insurance agency. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and an easy smile that made me feel slightly less panicked. "Tell me what's going on," she said after we shook hands and sat down. I explained everything: the surprise assessment, the facilities I couldn't access, Patricia's stonewalling, the non-functional access code. Jennifer took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Have you been able to review any of the HOA documents related to this assessment?" she asked. "No. Patricia said I need to make an appointment, and the earliest she can see me is 2 weeks out. But the payment is due in 30 days, and she's threatening to lien my property if I don't pay." Jennifer nodded. "That's a common tactic. They make it difficult to get information, then impose tight deadlines. Let me ask you this. When you closed on your property, did you receive a resale certificate?" "Yes. It listed the monthly dues and some basic rules about parking and noise." "Did it mention a pool or fitness center?" "No, nothing about any amenities like that." "And your CC and Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, what do they say about special assessments?" "They say the board can impose assessments for major repairs or improvements, but they have to provide written notice to all homeowners at least 60 days in advance." "Did you receive written notice?" "Not until this bill showed up." Jennifer leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the legal pad. "Quinton, this is a clear violation of your rights as a homeowner. The HOA has to follow its own governing documents and state law. If they didn't provide proper notice, the assessment isn't valid. So what do I do? First, send them a formal written dispute, certified mail. Cite the specific sections of your CC and RS and Arizona statute that they violated. Request copies of all relevant documents, meeting minutes, contractor bids, the vote tally, proof that written notice was sent to all homeowners. Give them a deadline to respond, maybe 10 days. And if they don't respond or refuse to provide the documents, then we file suit. The good news is that Arizona law allows you to recover attorney fees if you win an HOA dispute. The bad news is that litigation takes time and there's always risk. How much time are we talking about? Could be 6 months, could be a year. Depends on the court schedule and how hard the HOA fights. I felt my stomach sink. A year of this stress, of dealing with Patricia and her threats, but the alternative was paying $15,000 for something I'd never agreed to and couldn't even use. Let's start with the letter, I said. Maybe they'll back down once they realize I'm serious. Jennifer drafted the letter that afternoon, and I sent it certified mail the next morning. Then I did something else. I started knocking on doors in my development, asking my neighbors if they'd received the same assessment. The first 3 homes I tried, nobody answered. At the 4th house, a man in his 60s opened the door with a confused expression. "Can I help you?" "Hi, I'm Quinton Briggs. I live over on Mesquite Drive. I'm trying to find out if you received a special assessment from the HOA for pool and gym fees." His expression shifted to understanding. "Oh, that. Yeah, we got hit with it too. My wife was furious." "Did you pay it?" "We're still deciding. It's a lot of money and we never use the pool. My wife has bad knees, so the gym is useless to her." "Did you get any advance notice before the bill showed up?" He shook his head. "Just the invoice out of nowhere. When I called to complain, that Patricia woman told me it was too bad, that the board had already voted and it was final. I'm considering fighting this. I've talked to a lawyer. Would you be interested in joining me?" The man introduced himself as Robert Chen and invited me inside. His wife, Susan, was equally frustrated about the assessment. We talked for over an hour, and by the end, they agreed to split legal costs with me if Jennifer thought a joint case would be stronger. Over the next 2 weeks, I talked to 17 other homeowners. 8 of them had received the same assessment. 3 had already paid, not wanting to deal with the hassle. But 5 others were angry enough to consider joining a lawsuit. Meanwhile, my access code still didn't work. I called the HOA office 3 times, and each time Patricia said it was being processed, that these things took time, that I needed to be patient. On my 4th call, she stopped answering and let it go to voicemail. When my appointment finally came to review the HOA documents, I showed up at the office with a notepad and my phone ready to take photos. Patricia greeted me with barely concealed irritation. "You have 1 hour," she said, pointing to a small conference room with a stack of papers on the table. I started going through the documents methodically. The meeting minutes were sparse, just a few sentences noting that the board had voted to approve renovations to the pool and upgrades to the fitness center. There was no discussion recorded, no debate, no mention of how much it would cost or how it would be funded. The contractor bids were more interesting. The pool renovation had cost $80,000. The gym equipment was another $40,000. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd. The pool renovation invoice was dated 18 months ago, and the gym equipment was purchased 2 years ago. Why were they billing us now for improvements that had been completed long ago? I took photos of everything, working quickly, because I knew Patricia would enforce the 1-hour limit strictly. As I was finishing, I found a document that made my blood run cold. It was a financial report showing that the HOA's reserve fund had been depleted to cover these renovations. The special assessment wasn't for improvements. It was to replenish the reserve fund that the board had already spent without homeowner approval. When I confronted Patricia about this, she didn't even blink. The board has discretion to use reserve funds for community improvements. We're simply asking homeowners to restore the reserves to appropriate levels. That's not what the assessment letter said. It said we were paying for renovations and upgrades. Those were already completed and paid for. The end result is the same, Mr. Briggs. The community benefited from improvements, and now it's time to repay the reserves. Did the homeowners vote on using the reserves for this purpose? The board voted. That's sufficient under our bylaws. I gathered my photos and notes and left before I said something I'd regret. That evening, I met with Jennifer and showed her everything I'd found. She looked through the photos carefully, her expression growing more serious. "This is worse than I thought. They used reserve funds without homeowner approval for major renovations, and now they're trying to recoup the money through a special assessment that wasn't properly noticed. This is a clear breach of fiduciary duty." So we have a case? We absolutely have a case. I'd recommend we file sooner rather than later. How many homeowners are willing to join? 5 for sure, maybe 8 if we push. Let's start with the 5. We'll file a class action on behalf of all affected homeowners. The court can decide whether everyone is included or just those who opt in. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. Quinton Briggs, Robert and Susan Chen, Maria Rodriguez, Thomas Whitfield, and Janet Kemp versus Westfield Commons Homeowners Association and Patricia Drummond in her capacity as president. We asked the court to void the special assessment, order the HOA to return any payments already made, and award attorney fees and costs. Patricia's response was swift and vicious. Within days, I received a notice that the HOA was fining me $200 for having my trash cans visible from the street. They'd been in the exact same spot for 3 years, but suddenly it was a violation. Then came another fine for a weed growing in the gravel in my front yard. Then another for parking my car in my driveway instead of my garage. I took photos documenting that my neighbors had the same supposed violations without any fines. I kept every notice, every email, every certified letter. Jennifer said it was retaliation and would actually help our case. The other plaintiffs received similar treatment. Robert Chen got cited for his mailbox being the wrong color, even though it had been that color when he bought the house. Maria Rodriguez was told her front door wreath violated community standards. It was harassment, pure and simple, and it was making everyone angrier and more determined to fight. The first court hearing was scheduled for 2 months after we filed. It was just a preliminary hearing to set the schedule and address any initial motions, but I took the afternoon off work to attend. Patricia showed up with a lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who looked bored with the whole proceeding. The judge was a woman in her 40s named Angela Reeves, and she listened patiently as both lawyers made their opening arguments. Jennifer laid out our case: improper notice, misuse of reserve funds, facilities we couldn't access, retaliatory enforcement. The HOA's lawyer argued that the board had acted within its authority and that we were simply troublemakers trying to avoid our financial obligations. Judge Reeves asked pointed questions about the notice requirements and the reserve fund expenditures. The HOA lawyer stumbled over some of his answers, clearly not as familiar with the facts as he should have been. "I'm setting a trial date for 4 months from now," Judge Reeves said finally. "In the meantime, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from placing any liens on the plaintiff's properties related to this assessment. I'm also ordering the HOA to provide complete copies of all financial records, meeting minutes, and communications related to the pool and gym renovations to the plaintiffs within 14 days. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Patricia's face was tight with anger as she left the courtroom. The documents that arrived 2 weeks later were a goldmine. Jennifer went through them with me in her office, pointing out discrepancies and problems. "Look at this," she said, holding up a bank statement. "The pool renovation cost $80,000, but the invoice from the contractors for $60,000. Where did the other $20,000 go?" We dug deeper. The gym equipment that supposedly cost $40,000 had actually been purchased for $25,000, according to the receipts. The invoices that Patricia had shown me had been altered to inflate the costs. "This is fraud," Jennifer said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore. They've committed fraud, possibly embezzlement. We need to report this to the authorities." "Will that help our case?" "It'll definitely put pressure on the HOA, and it's the right thing to do. If Patricia is stealing from the reserve fund, she needs to be held accountable." We filed a report with the Arizona Attorney General's office and provided copies of all the financial documents. We also amended our lawsuit to include claims of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The next few weeks were intense. The Attorney General's office opened an investigation. Patricia stopped coming to the HOA office, and the board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but Maria Rodriguez's neighbor was on the board and told her that Patricia had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. The acting HOA president was a man named Gerald Foster, who seemed overwhelmed by the whole situation. He called me one evening and asked if we could meet. "I want to apologize," he said when we sat down at a coffee shop near the development. "I had no idea Patricia was manipulating the numbers. I voted for the assessment based on the information she provided to the board. If I'd known the truth, I never would have approved it." Did the other board members know? I don't think so. Patricia controlled all the financial information. She'd present us with summaries and invoices, and we trusted her. That was our mistake. What happens now? The board met last night and voted to suspend all collection efforts related to the pool and gym assessment. We're also going to refund anyone who already paid. And we're looking into getting a forensic accountant to review the HOA's finances to see if there are other problems we don't know about. It was more than I'd expected, but I wasn't ready to drop the lawsuit yet. That's a good start, but we still need accountability. People need to know that the board can't just do whatever it wants without consequence. I understand. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. The trial date arrived on a cold morning in January. Phoenix doesn't get truly cold, but 45 degrees feels frigid when you're used to summer temperatures over 100. I wore my best suit and met Jennifer and the other plaintiffs outside the courthouse. Patricia was there with her lawyer, looking diminished somehow, as if the last few months had taken a visible toll. The HOA had hired a different attorney for the trial, a sharp-eyed woman who seemed more competent than the first guy. The trial lasted 3 days. Jennifer called me as the first witness, and I walked the court through everything: buying my home, receiving the surprise assessment, trying to get information from Patricia, discovering the inflated invoices. The HOA's attorney tried to make me look like a troublemaker, asking if I'd ever complained about anything else before this, if I attended HOA meetings regularly, if I volunteered for any committees. "No, I didn't," I said honestly. "I work full-time and I mind my own business. But when someone tries to charge me $15,000 for something I never agreed to and can't use, I pay attention." Robert and Susan Chen testified about their experience, as did the other plaintiffs. Each story was similar: surprise bills, stonewalling from Patricia, retaliatory fines and harassment. Then, Jennifer called the forensic accountant, a serious man named David Park who had spent the last 2 months reviewing the HOA's finances. His testimony was devastating. "Oh no. I found evidence of systematic inflation of invoices and expenses dating back 4 years, David said. Contractor bills were altered before being presented to the board. Legitimate expenses of approximately $200,000 were reported as nearly $400,000. The difference appears to have been diverted to personal accounts controlled by Ms. Drummond." The courtroom was silent. Patricia stared at the table in front of her, her face pale. "Can you quantify the total amount that was misappropriated?" Jennifer asked. "Approximately $190,000 over 4 years. The HOA's attorney looked stricken. She asked for a recess and the judge granted 30 minutes. When we reconvened, the attorney approached the bench and asked to speak to the judge privately. Jennifer joined them, and they had a whispered conversation I couldn't hear. When they returned, the judge addressed the courtroom. "The defendant has indicated a willingness to settle this matter. We'll adjourn for the day to allow negotiations to take place." Settlement talks went late into the evening. The HOA, represented by Gerald Foster and the new attorney, wanted to make the case go away. They agreed to void the special assessment entirely, refund all money paid within 30 days, pay our attorney fees and costs, and cover compensatory damages for the retaliatory fines and harassment we'd endured. But Jennifer pushed for more. "This isn't just about money. This is about making sure this never happens again. We want structural reforms to how the HOA operates." After hours of back and forth, we reached an agreement. The HOA would refund 3 years of the pool and gym fees to everyone who had been assessed, even if they'd paid monthly instead of receiving a lump sum bill like I did. That included people who hadn't joined the lawsuit. The total came to over $300,000. The HOA would also implement new financial controls, Quarterly financial reports distributed to all homeowners, required homeowner votes for any reserve fund expenditure over $10,000, term limits for board members, and an independent audit every year. Patricia would resign immediately and agree to repay the embezzled funds. If she didn't, the HOA would pursue criminal charges. The settlement was presented to Judge Reeves the next morning. She reviewed it carefully, asking questions to make sure everyone understood the terms. "Mr. Briggs, are you satisfied with this settlement?" she asked me directly. "Yes, Your Honor. I think it's fair, and more importantly, I think it'll prevent this from happening to anyone else." "The court approves the settlement," Judge Reeves said. "I want to add that homeowners associations serve an important function in maintaining communities, but they're not above the law. Boards have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all homeowners, and when they breach that duty, there must be consequences. I hope this case serves as a reminder that transparency and accountability aren't optional." The refund check arrived 6 weeks later, $12,600, representing 3 years of pool and gym fees I'd been assessed, plus compensatory damages for the stress and retaliatory fines. It wasn't quite the $15,000 the original bill demanded because we'd negotiated down the monthly amount during settlement discussions, but it was more than I'd paid in HOA dues over 3 years. More satisfying than the money was the change in how the HOA operated. Gerald Foster remained as president and took his role seriously. Financial reports went out every quarter, detailed and transparent. When the HOA needed to repave the road 6 months later, they held a homeowner meeting with 3 contractor bids and a full explanation of costs before asking for a vote. It passed overwhelmingly because people trusted the process. Patricia didn't face criminal charges. She agreed to repay the money through a payment plan, and the Attorney General's office decided not to prosecute given her cooperation and lack of prior criminal history. I wasn't entirely happy about that, but Jennifer explained that criminal cases are difficult and expensive, and sometimes you have to accept partial justice. My access code finally worked about 3 months after the lawsuit settled. I went to the pool on a Saturday morning, curious to see these facilities that had caused so much trouble. The pool was nice, Olympic length with good landscaping around it. The gym was fine, nothing special but adequate. I never went back. It wasn't about the amenities. It had never been about the amenities. It was about being charged for something I hadn't agreed to, about being stonewalled and harassed when I asked questions, about a system that had no accountability until someone forced it to change. Robert and Susan Chen invited me over for dinner a few months later, along with Maria Rodriguez and Thomas Whitfield. Janet Kemp had moved to Colorado to be closer to her daughter, but she sent a card thanking everyone for fighting the good fight. "To justice," Robert said, raising his glass of wine. "To stubborn people who don't know when to give up," Susan added with a smile. We clinked glasses and talked about normal things, work, hobbies, plans for the holidays. The lawsuit had brought us together, but what kept us friends was simply liking each other. I still live in my townhouse in Westfield Commons. The HOA functions smoothly now, handling the routine tasks of maintaining common areas without drama or controversy. My monthly dues are still $120, and I know exactly where that money goes because the financial reports tell me. Sometimes I drive past the community center and see people swimming in the pool or working out in the gym. Good for them. Those facilities are there if I ever want to use them, and I'm paying a reasonable amount to maintain them along with everyone else. That's how it should work. The lesson wasn't that HOAs are inherently bad. The lesson was that any organization with power needs oversight, and that power unchecked will eventually be abused. Patricia Drummond was one person who let authority go to her head and thought she could get away with stealing from people who trusted her. But she was wrong, because enough people were willing to stand up and say no. Would I have fought if I'd known it would take nearly a year of my life, countless hours of stress, and the risk that I might lose and owe even more money? Honestly, I don't know. When you're in the middle of something like that, you can't see the end. You just take it one day at a time, one document at a time, one small victory at a time. But looking back now, I'm glad I did it. Not just for the money, though, that was nice. Not just for the vindication, though, that felt good too. I'm glad I did it because it mattered. It mattered to me, to my neighbors, to every future homeowner in Westfield Commons who will benefit from the reforms we forced the HOA to implement. And maybe, just maybe, it mattered beyond our little development. The case got some local news coverage, and Jennifer told me she'd received calls from homeowners in other communities dealing with similar problems. If our story helped even one other person stand up to an abusive HOA, then all the stress and worry was worth it. On a practical level, I learned more about homeowners associations, contract law, and the Arizona legal system than I ever wanted to know. I learned that certified mail is your friend, that documentation is crucial, and that lawyers are expensive but sometimes necessary. I learned that most judges are fair-minded people trying to do the right thing, and that the legal system, while slow and frustrating, generally works if you have the patience to see it through. I also learned that community matters, not the artificial community of an HOA that exists mainly to enforce rules and collect fees, but real community built through shared struggle and mutual support. Robert and Susan, Maria and Thomas, even Gerald Foster in his own way, these people became part of my life because we faced something difficult together. My career continued during all of this, though I'll admit I was distracted for months. My boss noticed and pulled me aside one day to ask if everything was okay. When I explained the situation, he was sympathetic. "My brother went through something similar in Florida," he said. "His HOA tried to foreclose on his house over $800 in disputed fees. It took him 2 years to fight it. These organizations can be ruthless." Having that understanding at work helped. I didn't have to hide the stress or pretend everything was fine when I was dealing with court dates and attorney meetings. The week after the settlement was finalized, I took a vacation. Just 4 days in San Diego, walking on the beach and eating good food and not thinking about HOAs or lawsuits or Patricia Drummond. It was the first time in months I felt truly relaxed. When I got back, there was a letter in my mailbox from the HOA. My heart sank for a moment, old reflexes kicking in. But it was just a notice about the annual holiday party at the community center. I almost threw it away, but then I decided to go. The party was crowded with neighbors I'd never met, kids running around eating cookies, holiday music playing too loud. Gerald Foster spotted me and came over with a plate of food. "Glad you could make it," he said. "Figured I should see what my $120 a month pays for," I said with a slight grin. He laughed. "Fair enough. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. We're looking for new board members for next year. Any interest?" I immediately wanted to say no. The last thing I needed was more involvement with the HOA. But then I thought about it. If people like me didn't step up, the board would be filled with people who had too much time and too much interest in controlling their neighbors' lives. Maybe the best way to prevent another Patricia was to be part of the solution. "Let me think about it," I said. I didn't end up joining the board. After thinking it through, I realized I didn't have the time or energy to do it properly. And doing it halfway would be worse than not doing it at all. But I did start attending the quarterly homeowner meetings, asking questions when things weren't clear, and keeping an eye on the financial reports. That's the real takeaway from the whole experience. Democracy, even the small-scale democracy of an HOA, requires participation. When people check out and assume someone else is handling things, that's when abuse happens. Accountability only works if people are paying attention. The pool got renovated again 2 years later, this time with proper homeowner approval and competitive bidding. The cost was reasonable, and nobody complained about paying for it because the process was transparent. That's how it should have been from the beginning. I still get angry when I think about Patricia and how she manipulated the system for years, stealing from people who trusted her. But that anger has faded to a dull irritation now, not the burning rage I felt when I first opened that assessment letter. Justice was served, as much as justice ever is in civil matters. The money was returned, the reforms were implemented, and Patricia lost her position and reputation. She moved out of Westfield Commons about 6 months after the settlement, and I haven't seen her since. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about what she did, if she regrets it, or if she rationalizes it somehow. I wonder if she tells herself she deserved that money for all the work she did managing the HOA, or if she acknowledges that she stole from her neighbors and betrayed their trust. Probably I'll never know, and that's okay. The story isn't about Patricia's redemption or lack thereof. It's about regular people standing up for themselves when faced with injustice, and about systems that work when people demand accountability. I'm more careful now about what I sign and where I live. When friends ask me about buying in HOA communities, I tell them it's not automatically bad, but they need to do their homework. Read the CC and Rs carefully. Attend at least one board meeting before buying. Look at the financial reports. Talk to current homeowners and ask if they're happy with how things are run. And if something seems wrong, if you're being charged for things that don't make sense or denied information you're entitled to, don't just accept it. Ask questions. Document everything. Find allies. Get legal advice if necessary. It might be a pain. It might be expensive and stressful, but the alternative is worse. The alternative is living in a community where a petty tyrant has unchecked power and the ability to make your life miserable on a whim. Nobody should have to live like that. 3 years after the initial settlement, I got a letter from the court. The case was officially closed, all terms had been satisfied, and the file would be archived. It was a mundane administrative notice, but it felt like closure. I filed it with all my other documents from the lawsuit, 3 thick folders that I keep in my home office. I probably don't need them anymore, but I can't quite bring myself to throw them away. They're proof that the whole thing really happened, that I'm not exaggerating or misremembering how bad it got. And they're a reminder that I fought and won, that I stood up to someone with power and came out the other side intact. That's worth remembering on days when work is frustrating or life feels overwhelming. I handled that situation. I can handle other challenges too. My townhouse is worth more now than when I bought it. The Phoenix real estate market has been strong, and Westfield Commons is considered a desirable community precisely because of how the HOA is run. Good governance matters, even at the level of a suburban development. I refinanced my mortgage last year to take advantage of lower interest rates, and the bank's appraiser commented on how well maintained the common areas were. She said it was obvious the HOA was doing a good job, that not all communities looked this clean and organized. I didn't tell her about the lawsuit or Patricia or any of it. I just thanked her and thought about how funny it was that the crisis had ultimately made the community better. Sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed properly. Robert Chen passed away last fall. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. Susan asked me to speak at the funeral, and I talked about his courage in standing up to the HOA when it would have been easier to just pay and move on. His kids thanked me afterward, saying they hadn't known that story. Dad was always about doing the right thing, his daughter told me, even when it was hard. Susan still lives in their house, and I check on her regularly. Maria Rodriguez moved to be closer to her grandchildren, but we exchange Christmas cards every year. Thomas Whitfield is talking about running for city council, and I plan to vote for him. These are the threads that make up a life. Small connections, shared experiences, people who matter because you went through something together. The lawsuit was just one chapter, but it was an important one. I'm writing this now because Jennifer Martinez suggested it might help other people dealing with similar situations. She said she gets calls every week from homeowners fighting their HOAs, and most of them feel alone and overwhelmed. If people knew your story, she told me, it might give them hope that fighting back is possible. So here it is, the whole story. Not a fairy tale where everything worked out perfectly, not a horror story where the villain completely destroyed the hero. Just real life, messy and complicated, with partial victories and imperfect justice. The pool is still there. The gym still has its equipment. I still pay my monthly dues. Patricia is somewhere else, hopefully not in a position to take advantage of anyone else's trust. And I'm still here in my townhouse on Mesquite Drive, living my life, going to work, occasionally using the pool on hot summer days when I feel like swimming. It's not a dramatic ending, but it's an honest one. The fight is over. The refund was paid. The reforms were implemented. Life goes on, a little better than it was before, because people stood up and demanded better. That's all any of us can do, really. See something wrong, speak up about it, and push for change even when it's difficult. The system doesn't fix itself. It takes regular people willing to fight for what's right. I'd like to think I'd make the same choices again if faced with a similar situation, but I also hope I never have to find out. Once per lifetime dealing with a corrupt HOA president is more than enough. The story could have ended differently. I could have paid the $15,000 and avoided the whole mess. The HOA could have won in court, leaving me with even more debt and a lien on my property. Patricia could have been a more skilled fraud who covered her tracks better, making it impossible to prove what she'd done. Any of those outcomes were possible. The fact that things worked out the way they did involved skill and effort and determination, but also luck and timing and a judge who took our claims seriously. I'm grateful for how it turned out, grateful to Jennifer for her expertise and dedication, grateful to my fellow plaintiffs for standing with me, grateful to Gerald Foster for stepping up when the HOA needed better leadership, even grateful to Patricia in a weird way, because her corruption was so blatant that proving our case became possible. If she'd been smarter about stealing from the reserve fund, if she'd been less aggressive in her retaliation, if she'd been willing to negotiate early on instead of stonewalling, we might never have gone to court. Her own arrogance and overconfidence made justice possible. There's probably a lesson in that about hubris and nemesis, but I'm too tired to figure out what it is. The whole experience wore me out in ways I'm still recovering from, even years later. Trust is harder now. When I get mail from any organization asking for money, I scrutinize it carefully. When someone in authority tells me something is required or mandatory, I verify it independently. The naivety I had before, the assumption that people in charge are generally honest and acting in good faith, that's gone. I'm not sure if that's growth or damage. Probably it's both. But I'm more confident too. I know I can handle difficult situations now. I know I can stand up to bullies and navigate the legal system and find allies when I need them. Those are valuable skills, even if I wish I hadn't needed to develop them the way I did. My parents were proud when I told them about winning the case. My dad said he wasn't surprised, that I'd always been stubborn as a kid, unwilling to back down when I thought something was unfair. He meant it as a compliment. My mom worried about the stress and asked if all the fighting had been worth it. I told her yes, and I think that's true, though there were definitely moments during the worst of it when I questioned that answer. The legal bills were substantial, even though we recovered attorney fees eventually. The emotional toll was higher, but yes, it was worth it. Some things matter enough to fight for, even when the fight is exhausting and expensive. Now, when I park in my driveway and walk to my front door, I don't feel that low-grade anxiety that lived in my chest for months while the lawsuit was pending. I don't dread checking my mail, wondering what new harassment the HOA might send. I don't lie awake at night calculating how I'd afford a $15,000 assessment. I just live here, peacefully and quietly, in a community that mostly functions the way it should. That peace is what I fought for, and that's what I won. 3 years of refunds, $12,600 returned to me, and hundreds of thousands returned to my neighbors. Financial reforms that will benefit every future homeowner in Westfield Commons. One corrupt official removed from power and held accountable for her actions. It's not everything. It's not perfect justice or complete restoration or punishment that truly fits the crime. But it's something real and meaningful. Change that matters, a victory worth celebrating. And that's enough. After everything, that's more than enough.